Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I am very excited and grateful for this opportunity. It is pretty much unheard of for a Congresswoman to visit a small town such as ours. Let's appreciate this event for what it is, a chance to have a meaningful conversation with someone who can represent our concerns at a national level. Please be respectful and courteous to our visitors as well as your fellow residents. On behalf of the town of Pownal, I would like to extend our profound gratitude to the Congresswoman and her team for coming. And with that, I'm going to turn the call.
Good afternoon, everybody. I know I'm not who you're waiting for, but I'll
anyway.
My name is David Scher. I serve as the Congresswoman's State Director, which means I manage the state section of her congressional office. There's the DC office and the state office. We also have here Jessica and Morgan and Emma, who are all on staff. Please don't hesitate to ask us questions anytime. Pull us aside if you have questions. We're happy to be of service. We have cards we can give you if you have questions later. A couple things we like to do at any community meeting is just make sure that if there's somebody who hasn't had a chance to ask a question or make a comment yet, if you already have, to let that person who hasn't had a chance yet to take their turn, and also just to generally be reasonable in the length of your comments or questions, so that we can be respectful and let other community members have a chance to speak as well. So thanks so much for being here, and without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Congresswoman Balint.
Thank you. There's some folks in the hall. I want to make sure anyone who wants to get in can find space. So if there's room and people can scooch down, all are welcome. Well, thank you so much, and Tara, thanks so much for really helping me pull this together. Come on in. We're just getting started. I'm very happy to be here in Pownal. And I thought what I would do is start by telling you a little bit about me, because I'm sure some of you are meeting me for the first time. Talk about what I do in Congress, what committees I'm on. Talk about this moment that we're in, sort of how I'm seeing where we are. And then turn it over to you. The most important part of this meeting is for me to field questions and hear what's on your mind. Okay, because I'm the only one you get. I'm the only one in the house that represents you. So these meetings are critically important. So as I said, I'm your lone representative. It's because we don't have a lot of population in Vermont. And I live over the hill in Brattleboro with my family. I've got 2 kids in the high school over there. But my main office is in Burlington, because a lot of the folks in this state live in the Burlington, Montpelier area. So that's where David is, and Jessica and Morgan. They're in my Burlington office, though I do have a small office in Brattleboro, so we can accommodate meetings there as well. And I like to tell people sort of how my schedule works, because a lot of people don't know. So basically, I fly down to DC every week at the beginning of the week, and I work there in committee and taking votes on the floor, and then I fly back at the end of the week. I come home every single weekend to Vermont, and when I was talking with Bernie when I first ran, it was one of the things he said to me. He said it's critically important for anyone representing Vermont to get back to Vermont every single weekend, because you have to be constantly in touch with your constituents. So I really take that to heart, and every 3rd or 4th week, we get what's called the district work week, which is how I'm able to be here today, because I'm not in DC this week. And beginning of the week, I was up in Burlington and Waterbury and northern part of the state, then over in Brattleboro today in Pownal. And it's a treat for me to get all around to all the different corners of the state. So I'm in my 2nd term in Congress. Before that, I was in the legislature. I served on the Economic Development and Housing Committee the entire time in the state legislature. Is something that's incredibly important to me, and still is. Housing is one of my top priorities, because I know it's holding us back economically in the state. Before that, I was a teacher. I taught in 4 different rural public schools in Vermont. I taught history, and social studies and civics, and which is one of the reasons why, yeah, I see some people appreciating teachers. And I know that public schools were a way to get everybody a fair shot. And all of the families that I taught, or had, the students that I taught and their families that I've had for years are the things that inform me in my work in Congress. So in Congress, I work on 2 committees. I serve on the Budget Committee and I serve on the Judiciary Committee. And then within the Judiciary Committee, there are subcommittees. And I serve on the Constitutional Committee and I serve on, yes, very important. And I serve on a committee called Antitrust. And that is about breaking up big monopolies. And we used to be really good at it. About 100 years ago, we were really good at it. And one of the reasons why we have such economic disparity in this country is because we're not enforcing the laws that we have on the books. So I wanted to talk about that. So look, I ran as a Democrat. I am a Democrat, but I represent the whole state. And that's very important to me because the work that I do is not to serve Democrats in Vermont. It's to look at the issues that are before me in committee and think to myself, how is this going to impact Vermonters and Vermont communities? Will we be better off by this policy or will we not? That is my North Star. That transcends party. When I was in the state legislature, I was the first woman ever to lead the Senate. And I was very proud because on the day that I was elected to lead the Senate, I was elected by unanimous vote. Republicans and Democrats voted for me because they knew I was a straight shooter. I didn't play games, and I didn't engage in nasty partisan rhetoric. That is who I still am. It's incredibly important to me. I have political opponents on the other side. We disagree about policy, but I do not see the folks on the other side of the aisle as my enemy, and I don't want them to see me as the enemy. And I'm very concerned about this moment that we're in this country where folks with microphone on both sides of the aisle dehumanize each other, tear each other down, try to act like some people are more worthy of being Americans than others. And I think it's very dangerous for us as communities and as a nation. And I work really hard not to engage in that. And it's a charge that I've given my staff, both here in Vermont and my staff in DC. I don't want to be part of that. So I wanted to start in talking about my work about an experience I had in my first few days in Congress. So when you get elected to Congress, pretty much the week after you win your election, you have to go down to DC for 2 weeks of orientation. You don't even know what your job is going to entail. You haven't hired a staff yet, but you go down for orientation, and you have orientation. It's bipartisan. Every workshop, every meeting, you are getting to know your colleagues. And yeah, you meet in your caucus, your Democratic caucus or your Republican conference on more policy or ideological issues, but mostly you're just together learning how to do the job. And one morning, I was up early, because I'm an early riser. Early to bed, early to rise. That's who I am. And all the Democrats had slept in. Clearly, I don't know if they were out drinking the night before, I don't know. But I got up in the hotel and looked at where we were all staying, and I saw that everybody who was up early was a Republican. And I made a decision in that moment. I had to make a decision. Am I going back to bed and waiting till some of my friends or, right, am I going to live my values, which is we're all Americans. So I sat down at a table, and I hadn't anticipated this, but they just assumed I was a Republican they hadn't met yet. It was really interesting because, I mean, look how I'm dressed, but that's all right. I look like I'm from Vermont. But I sat down, and they're talking about their races, and I was really intrigued. And I said, well, tell me about your race. And they said, oh, well, you know how it is when the RNC gets involved. And I said, I don't actually. I'm a Democrat. And you could have heard a pin drop. And you could sort of see the thought bubbles of, why are you sitting with us? And I took a deep breath and I said, I knew you were Republicans when I sat down. And I said, I'm genuinely curious about how you got here. We all got here the same. I want to know about your races. I want to know about your districts. I said, if we can't sit and have a cup of coffee and a muffin together, then it's not just that Congress is broken. It's that the country is broken. And I stayed. I like to tell you it got really fun after that, but it didn't. It was awkward the whole time. But the woman who I talked with the most has been my friend ever since that day. And her staffer came to find me on the last day of orientation. And he said, Congresswoman, I have been watching you all week. And I was very curious about that time we had at that breakfast. And I thought, is this an act? Is this what is this? What is her deal? What's her story? He said, I've been watching you all week from afar, and I see this is who you are. You love people, that's why you do what you do. He said, I also looked your bio up and I saw that you were a teacher. And he said, my mom is a teacher. So I may be a Republican or a Democrat, but I kind of understand what you're about. And then he did what all 20-somethings do to show affection. He said, can I get a selfie? We did that. And so this woman, her name is Monica Dela Cruz. You can look her up. She's a Republican from Texas. We still have a good relationship, and we often vote in opposite ways, but we don't let that get in the way of having a connection to each other. And I want you to know that about me because it's important to me. And I think people are really sick and tired of the screaming at each other. I mean, they're sick and tired of us spending too much time talking that we don't spend enough time listening. And I really want to be focused on the needs of people back in Vermont. And we can disagree. We can disagree on policy, but I hope never to disrespect anyone regardless of who you voted for. Because right now it's not important to me who you voted for in the last election. What's important to me is how we're going to move forward from this moment. That's what I'm focused on. So, what I've seen in the last 5 weeks has given me a lot of concern. Now, a lot of people have been talking about the executive orders that the president has issued. And I just want to be really clear. All presidents issue executive orders, okay? It's not in the Constitution, but it's an acceptable means for a president to lay out sort of their policy agenda. What's been unusual about the executive orders right now is that there have been so many in such a short amount of time. In fact, he released more in the first day of office than any other president has ever. And some of them pretty clearly violate federal law and constitutional law. So that's a concern.
Hear, hear.
And so I was really hoping that the president would spend those first few weeks in office doing a couple of the things he talked about on the campaign trail that I knew that Vermonters also cared about. He did talk about investing in housing. He did talk about capping the interest rates on credit cards that a lot of people are struggling with. He talked about lowering the cost of prescription drugs. And he talked about lowering costs generally. And what he has put forward in his executive orders are not really focused on those things. And I'm deeply concerned that Elon Musk has much too much access to our personal and private data. Now, the president can choose whoever he or she wants to lead up agencies. The weird part about the space that Elon Musk exists in is it's not really a real position. It has been created, which again is not necessarily outside of the bounds of what a president can do, but he has not sworn an oath to the Constitution. He has not sworn an oath to ethics, which every person who works in the civil service has to do. And we don't know exactly what he's doing. That's the most disturbing thing for me. Congress has created things like the Department of Education or the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. It is a congressional creation, and only Congress can dismantle those things. Now, in the last couple of weeks, we've tried to get into those buildings to talk to the administrators, and they literally have locked us out of those buildings. I don't care, again, if you're a Republican or a Democrat or if you never vote at all. I think we can agree that most things that are happening in secret and behind locked doors are not good things on the whole. So that worries me. I'm all for cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. I don't know a single Vermonter who isn't. We're all cheap, okay? But again, show us what you're doing. Show us how you're doing it. Be transparent in the way that you're doing it. That's what I'm asking for. So there's been a lot of chaos and confusion, and I just want to say, normally a team of, whether you're a Republican Congresswoman or Democratic, you have a liaison to the White House. You have people that you talk with on a daily basis about what's coming down the pike, what's happening, what is the president trying to do with this particular thing. We're not getting that information. So it's very hard for us to answer questions for our constituents about why can't, if the Head Start program can't draw down its federal dollars, why can't I get those dollars? We can't get those answers. Or I was meeting with federal workers up in Burlington yesterday who work for the passport office. Their contracts are not being honored. They're being asked to do things that their contracts didn't include when they were hired to be workers. We can't get straight answers about that. So when you have chaos and confusion, obviously it does not give people a sense of stability or calm. And the other thing I wanted to touch on before I turn it over to all of you is that businesses in Vermont, and we're a state of small businesses, right? Depending on the year, we have the most small businesses per capita than any other state. It's what makes us up. And my phone, personal phone, ringing off the hook from small businesses who have a lot of business with Canada, who are saying to me, I don't know how my business will survive a trade war with Canada. I don't know why you can't give me more information about what's coming. That is the hard thing. You can't make plans as a business if you don't know what's coming. So it gives me no pleasure whatsoever to tell you that I think things are not in a good place. It doesn't. Party does not come first for me. Country, the Constitution, comes first for me. I want a government that is going to be functioning so that it can meet the needs of my constituents. That's what I want. And I have given my entire life to trying to serve my working life as a teacher and as a state legislature and now as a congresswoman. My North Star has always been, how do I relieve suffering? That's it. If I could boil it down to one thing, that's it. And so I don't have any hidden agenda. I don't take corporate money. I don't have what they call fat cat donors that dictate what I do. All that I'm trying to do is hopefully in the service of all of you. So I have a lot more to say, but I think I'm going to stop there and turn it directly over to you and just say thanks once again. Tara, where are you? Thank you once again for inviting me here. And I don't have a lot of ego wrapped up in this job, and I never say I have a thick skin, because I don't, but I have a big heart, and you're not going to offend me if you disagree with me. So I'd love to hear from you.
Hi, as a transplant from DC.
Oh, hey! The swamp!
We moved up here 2 years ago, almost. I like what you're saying about, not attacking the other side and trying to be above that. What's the contingency of that group? I mean, because all we hear on the news is, they're awful, they're terrible, and it's like, do people really talk to each other?
Only surface. Only surface. So, and this is a change. I've talked to Bernie and Peter about this a lot because they were both in the House before they were senators. And they said, what you have in the House right now is not like anything we ever experienced. That we could always find an opportunity to have a conversation about policy. That kind of thing only happens behind closed doors when no one can see that you're meeting, right? And we used to, and this is sort of both the upside and the downside. So it used to be members of Congress would relocate. They'd move to DC, right? That is essentially what Senator Leahy did. And made a life there, and he and Marcel and their family, they were there all the time. So he did get to know a lot of people across the aisle. Now, right now, the expectation for constituents is that you're going to be in your home state a lot. So what that happens is, at the end of the week, everybody clears out. We do try, like I know it's on brand as a gay woman, I am the bipartisan women's softball team, but I have other opportunities of meeting with my colleagues in caucuses, but it's very difficult. And I will tell you, a lot of people ask me, what's happening with the Republican conference right now? There was an article that came out yesterday, and this is literally the title of the article, so forgive me. It says, Republicans are scared shitless. That's the title of the article. And they interviewed some Senate Republicans who had, some weeks ago, decided they were going to vote against Hegseth. And they received credible death threats. And the FBI went to them and said, I just need you to know this, that your posts about how you're going to vote have elicited credible death threats. And so they met with colleagues, and their colleagues said, why would you do that to yourself and your family? We heard that last year when we were debating over the Speaker of the House. I don't know if you remember, McCarthy had been Speaker, and then he lost the speakership. And then there were 3 weeks or so when we didn't have a Speaker of the House. And we kept having Republicans who would put their name forward, and it seemed like we'd have a vote and then they'd withdraw. And what was happening behind the scenes is that those people were being told, you will step down, you are not the candidate. And people said to us, people are showing up at my wife's business, people are threatening my kids. So there are people who are afraid. There are also people who just hope nobody will notice them. And some of those are the folks who we call the sort of governing-minded Republicans, the people that I can meet with behind closed doors on issues that I care about, like housing and mental health and economic development. And they just say, I do not want. And these are people, let's just be clear, like these are still people who are staunch conservatives, right? They're not progressive Democrats. And they will say to me, I do not want to get the attention of Trump or the MAGA movement, so I am not going to stand up right now. I am hoping this will go away soon. And so I tell you this because that's a hard place for people to be in. It's a hard place for our country to be in. Now, those of us who also routinely get attacked on social media and get followed down the hall and harassed, it's hard sometimes in those moments for me to have that well of compassion because, like, unfortunately, this is the job right now, and that part of it is terrible. But even the Republicans that like I said, they are conservative Republicans, but they feel like they cannot speak out right now. So, how do we get beyond that then? When they are afraid of a movement. Well, I'll give you an example. Let's bring it back let's go to January 6th, okay? So there were many, many people at January 6th, and some from Vermont who went down there, and they were peaceful. And they did march to the Capitol building, and they did not storm the Capitol, right? There were thousands and thousands of people there. But the people who were prosecuted, many of whom who admitted their guilt, who pleaded guilty to violence, vandalism, threatening behavior. When Trump let out those violent felons, what they did the next day was come to the Capitol. And they sat in the gallery and they watched us. And they walked the halls. The Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers. So I tell you this because where we're at right now is not normal. And I am willing always to work with anyone who is working with me in good faith. But when I know my Republican colleagues are not saying what they really feel because they're afraid, how will we get anything done? How will we move beyond this moment? That is what I spend just about every waking moment thinking about. So right now, in the last 24 hours, I was walking in with someone, I said, I finally saw a little crack. In the last 24 hours, there were 2 Republicans that I know of who finally spoke out. One spoke out against the executive orders, and they said it's getting out of hand. This chaos is out of hand. And the other said, no, Putin is not someone that we should look up to. Putin is in fact a brutal dictator. But that's the first crack that I've seen. I'm hoping more people will realize that you can adhere to your conservative values around the economy and not be willing to give up on the democracy itself. So that was a long answer. But I don't know if I will follow up.
Oh, yeah. Well,
And then I'll go back here. Yeah.
are they waiting for like something legal to come in and say, no, you can't do that?
They're afraid.
Do you think that would change their minds or make them a little braver?
I don't think they know what they're waiting for. They want it to go away. And I don't mean that sarcastically, I really don't. Like, I think they didn't think Trump would win again this time. That's why they didn't vote to convict in the Senate. And McConnell has told a good friend of mine, he said, I couldn't convince enough people to vote to convict because, again, they were afraid that their houses would be stormed the way the Capitol was stormed. And so people thought that this wouldn't happen again, but here we are. So I'm gonna go right behind you there.
You had mentioned the Proud Boys in the audience. Was that covered by news?
Very little.
Yeah,
You had, I don't remember if it was the leader of the Oath Keepers or the leader of the Proud Boys holding court under my office building. There's a Dunkin' Donuts down there. It's like a whole underground city down there, holding court with reporters. But they were there for one reason, and that was intimidation. So, yes, back here.
Thank you for your service, first of all.
You're welcome.
And I understand Vermont gets fairly inexpensive electricity from Canada. So what could theoretically happen if we give them, heavy tariffs?
Yeah, I'm really concerned about that. We get a lot of our electricity from Hydro-Quebec. I've been on the phone with Green Mountain Power about this issue for weeks now. If we get into a trade war with Canada, it will not only affect our electricity in Vermont, it's going to affect our gas. We get most of our gas as well from Canada. And I know that we're kind of in this weird limbo too, because it seemed like the trade war was imminent, and then we sort of came up to the line and we pulled back. The concern I have again about not having that that stability in that with a business knowing what's around the corner, we've received calls at my office that people who prepaid for their home heating oil, which a lot of us do, because goes back to what I was saying, we're cheap, we want to lock in our rates, right? They're getting charged additional, essentially a flat fee in anticipation that Canada will be retaliating and the price will go up. I've heard that about windows. So in terms of our housing prices, I've heard from businesses that are concerned that they're not going to be able to build their homes because they get their windows from Canada. I've heard this about lumber. I've heard this about components on skis for some of our small, shops in Vermont. And so we are completely and totally bound up with our trading relationship with Canada. And I don't think people fully anticipate that. And I want to be really clear. There is a reason to have tariffs, okay? You can use tariffs strategically to protect an industry, to protect workers. Presidents often use tariffs strategically. As my dad would say, you don't use a sledgehammer, you use a ball-peen hammer, okay? we should be not having threats of blanket tariffs on Europe or Canada or Mexico. We should be thinking about specific industries. And those prices are going to be passed off to lower and middle class Americans. They just are. That's how the math works. These businesses aren't going to be able to absorb them. And the businesses have told me that themselves. We don't have that kind of margin. So we're going to pass it on to the consumer. So I worry about that. Yeah. Yes.
Haven't called you once because I know I don't have to.
Okay.
But I do want to just make these two
Yes,
short
please.
statements, and you can respond or not.
Yeah, okay.
The deficit must be brought way down, period. I would like to see the Democrats actually support that and support it hard, instead of being pinned with the party that causes the deficit, even though it may not be true. And also, once this hopefully is over soon, I want the Democrats to prepare to focus on the under 40-year-old population, because they need support and they need hope. They have no hope. Young people were not having children even prior to this. Now this is like, oh, well, the world's going to be over in a very short period of time, so we can't have children. Our young high school children and even elementary school children, they're dealing with mental health. We have to be able to give hope to our children.
I agree. So I'll take the second one first. I actually did a youth roundtable yesterday, specifically hearing from and talking to youth around the state, because you're absolutely right. And I know Jessica was on the call with me. Like, the questions were amazing. The statements that these kids had, the things that they were thinking about. They are worried about their future. I know that because I sit down at dinner with 2 high school students every time I'm home. My 2 high school students are worried about how they're going to have a future that they can feel good about. I also know that we have a terrible mental health crisis, not just in Vermont, but in this country. And part of it is because of the pandemic, but it was the rates of depression and anxiety among teens and 20-somethings was rising even before the pandemic, but it certainly exacerbated it. And I have done quite a bit of work in Congress trying to get bipartisan bills across the finish line around investments in mental health, because I know we desperately need it. And I'm going to continue that work. To your first point, of course we should be concerned about the deficit. The problem that I have is when you look at the last 50 to 70 years and you see when the deficit has ballooned, it has almost always been under Republican presidents. Okay? That is just the hard facts. Now, that doesn't mean that Democratic presidents haven't also contributed to it. I just have a very hard time ceding that ground of fiscal responsibility to people in my budget committee that try to lecture me when in the first Trump administration, there was a giant, massive hole blown in the deficit by tax cuts that went to the extremely wealthy. So, we both have to work on this. I do not believe that the way to do that is to go right now with an aging population after Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid. So, but I'm happy to have your follow-up.
To be clear, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is the Democrats allow themselves, and I don't take that the wrong way.
Oh, like I said, I won't take any offense.
The Democratic Party and Democrats allow ourselves to be pinned with the.
Oh, I
this.
see. Yes.
So I'm not saying it is clearly mostly the Republicans. It is clearly, and what they want to do right now is decimate everyone to line the pockets of the ultra rich. I understand that. Somehow politically, the Democrats have to allow themselves to be shown as a party that does care about the deficit, because if we don't fix the deficit, our kids are screwed anyway.
Yes.
So we gotta change that narrative somehow.
I agree. And it's not just that. It's on a whole host of issues. Okay? We have a big tent on our side, and sometimes we get very much in our heads about the kind of messages that we are using. They don't really land very well. I could give you a whole other talk about messaging, which I won't. But I think we also have really dropped the ball in not focusing on what I see as really underpinning this moment right now, which is put on my history and social studies hat. We are in another Gilded Age, a second Gilded Age here. 100 years ago, we had horrible, terrible economic inequality. We are there again, right? 1973, the top 1% owned about 9% of the wealth in this country. Today, the top 1% owns about 27%. You've got workers who are much more productive now, but they're bringing home less money. They don't have pensions. They don't have security. Housing, you can adjust for inflation. It doesn't matter. We are paying more now. Our young people can't make it work. And so we have not had, and to our detriment, a really clear message and focus on working people in this country. And there's a deep sense of betrayal. And I just have to make this, I want to tidy it up in a little bow, because we started with the deficit. This last proposal that came through the budget committee will not only give the 1% another set of massive tax cuts, it will cut $880 billion away from Medicaid, and it will increase the deficit by another nearly $2 trillion. So we have to follow the money. Regardless of party, we have to follow the money. I think I saw someone over here, yes.
Yeah, I'll just back to the first question. I really appreciate the fact that you want to reach across the aisle, that you're interested in talking to Republicans. It's one of the reasons I voted for you. But this is a very different time. These are not normal times.
No, they're not.
You said it yourself.
Yeah.
I just want to know, where's the anger? We feel like, those of us out here feel like the Democratic Party is just sitting there, largely. There are senators and there are congresspeople that are really trying to take action. But by and large, it feels like Democrats are sitting back and acting frightened and not really screaming about this.
Yeah,
it's a very frightening time.
I'm really baffled by that. I hear you, and I want to tell you there's a lot of things going on here. So I want to sort of pull all the parts out. The first is there are a lot of us angry. And there are, and I really encourage you, if you don't follow me, I know some people are not on social media, but if you are, follow me on Instagram, follow me on all the platforms. I really try to get information out every day. I was at every single protest that happened in DC. I was saying a protest a day keeps the autocrats away, okay? I was at Treasury, I was at Education, I was at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. We have right now a press that has been coward. The framing and their narrative that the Democrats are doing nothing has sort of taken hold here. And that's not what I see from my colleagues across this country. Now, that being said, I would like to see us be willing to throw some more punches, to throw some more elbows, not be demonizing, not be dehumanizing, not scapegoating, but to call it out when people are doing things that are materially going to hurt their own constituents. And that's what I see happening right now, which is why we try to bring up on the floor when you have a member across the aisle who is voting to hurt their own constituents. We have the stats right there and we call them on it in real time. 120,000 of your people are going to be thrown off of Medicaid because of how you just voted. Now, I do think we don't have right now a leader, a Democratic leader that people are looking to. It's not Chuck Schumer. Hakeem Jeffries is a fighter, but he doesn't show it in the way that I think we all need to see right now. You've got a new chair of the party, Ken Martin. I'm feeling hopeful about that. More hopeful than I was a few months ago. I feel like he understands that we need a working people's coalition. At least there is that understanding. But it's going to take all of us. Somebody asked me, well, what are we going to do so Trump tweeted, he truthed the other day that he who saves his country breaks no laws. He who saves his country breaks no laws, which is giving himself permission to do whatever he wants. Around that same time, the vice president tweeted, the president essentially does not have to listen to the judicial branch, which of course runs completely counter to the way that our government is set up. So a lot of people have been asking me, well, what will we do if the judicial branch rules? And of course we have checks and balances. We have 3 co-equal branches of government. I have to say it all the time. 3 co-equal. They each check each other. That's how it's supposed to work. What happens if the Supreme Court rules or a federal judge rules and the administration defies that? What do? Certainly we are spending a lot of time in judiciary behind the scenes thinking about that, talking with our outside partners about what we do, but honestly, we have to take to the streets. We do. Because again, for me, it's about knowing what the signs are when the democracy is being eroded, and I see those signs. And I know many of you know my story, but so my dad's family was killed in the Holocaust. And I was brought up with this strong understanding that you watch for certain signs when the democracy is slipping away. One is that the press gets attacked mercilessly. One is they start to seize control of the arts, which we've seen in the last couple of weeks. One is when they threaten journalists with jailing. All of these things that we are not supposed to see in a healthy democracy, we're seeing right now. So I don't take it lightly. We have to take to the streets. And the work that we do in Congress is trying to find 3 Republicans. That's what it would take to end a lot of this nonsense. Just 3. They only have a 3-person majority in the House. That's why I feel like in the last couple of days, seeing this glimmer of hope of people pushing back, I feel like they have a limit, but they have to band together. That's it. They can't allow themselves to be picked off one by one. But, I was saying to a colleague the other day who often wears a suit and a tie, I said, I need you to take your tie off, roll your sleeves up, and look like you're going into a barroom brawl. That's what we need to see right now. We need a visual of people fighting. And just know there's so many of us who are working so hard, but we may not be making the evening news. Yes, sir.
So what can we do? I've been, part of the month to call.
Yeah, you call your representatives, you call your senators, you call the White House. Absolutely call the White House.
But should we be calling, for instance, Republican senators? Years ago, I was told you're wasting your time. If you're not a constituent of theirs, you're not going to matter at all. This is obviously
I get this question a lot.
times.
Yeah. So, it's true that we listen to our constituents more than others because you are the ones who directly elected us, so we have to respond to you first, of course. It's more effective if you reach out to friends and family who live in those districts with those representatives or senators. Mm-hmm. That being said, whenever I see a Republican colleague doing something that I believe is in support of the democracy, I talk about it online. And we have to reach out to those offices. So this week, oh my gosh, let me make sure. Susan Collins voted against Kash Patel. That was an important vote. You had Lisa Murkowski a couple weeks ago voting against, oh gosh, I can't keep them all straight, but I post about them and say we need to let them know that we're watching and we're grateful because it is frightening for them. And it's, a lot of people say, oh, they're just worried about their next election. If you're in the Senate, you're not really worried about your next election. It's 6 years, right? I mean, honestly, in the House, yeah, a lot of these Republicans are worried that Trump is going to run a primary opponent, and Musk has already said, I'm going to bankroll all of them. Okay, so that is more relevant. But for a senator, so it has to be about something else instead of looking to the next election. So when you see them standing up for the democracy, you have to let them know. Because right now, I gotta tell you, this job is really, really lonely. It just is. People are, of course, worried and anxious and full of anger and rage. And I believe in many instances, rightly so. But that's what we mostly get, is a lot of rage and anger. So if you can take the time to call one of those offices and say, I saw that you did this and that must have been hard. Thank you for doing that. They will get that message, believe me. They will. Yes, and Becca.
Through your lens now of being in national politics and coming to a small town like Pownal, what would your advice be to those of us here that do try to speak up or seek transparency and feel either they're classified as disruptors or, when they're genuinely worried about things like education or crime or even local government issues? What would your advice be to those folks?
We should always be allowed to demand transparency, especially in Vermont, in a small town, when you get to have your congressperson, show up. I think for me, it's always about how we do that work is also important, and making sure that we are certainly asking the right questions of the right people, and making sure we're not setting up a dynamic of us them. And I was a teacher for many years, and there was one woman who often came to our school board meetings, and there were times when I could support where she was coming from, but other times it just turned into a personal attack, and it didn't seem to be about the issue anymore. It just seemed about a personal attack. But I know people right now, regardless of political position, feel much more hesitant to speak up at school board meetings, select board meetings, town meetings across the state. I'm hearing that across the state. Nobody wants to be seen as a target. And so, I don't know you, but I appreciate that you care enough to show up. That's the other thing. We gotta care enough to show up. So, thanks for being here. Yeah, over here.
Different subject, the
Okay.
Bennington Monument.
Oh,
Do you foresee, as I hope you do, a federal role in the restoration, the $40 million perhaps restoration?
as a history teacher, I strongly believe in the restoration.
I set you up for that.
Now, the concern I have is that all our federal funding is up in the air right now. So we have community project funding. Did I get that right? Yeah. Community project. They used to be called earmarks, but now we call it community project funding. We were able to get a good chunk of money for downtown Bennington to build some housing, a senior center, all those things. those kinds of investments around the state, I actually think are great use of tax dollars, because it's also a way that we get to work with our Republican colleagues, because they also care about their home districts and they also want to build housing, those things. I'm concerned that this is going to be something that DOGE goes after, because where does it give you dollars back?
Vermont?
About $275,000 each year for initiatives.
Right, but
I know a
here,
lot about this, right?
right, but here,
Right
right?
here. Yeah.
It comes back here.
Yeah.
It's not coming back to the federal government. So I'm very concerned that this is one of the things that, not Bennington specifically, but the federal funds that go to individual communities around the country, I'm afraid that that's not going to be preserved. And I hope that Republicans will stand up for it, because they've seen it do good work in their communities as well. But right now, nothing seems to be off the table. That's also a concern of mine. You had, I know you didn't ask me about this, but I just want to make this connection. You had DOGE firing or giving illegal buyouts to people that watch our nuclear arsenal. You had DOGE firing people in the Veterans Administration, and then you lost a veterans hotline. People were fired who were supposed to be on the front lines of protecting us from bird flu, and now this administration is scrambling to hire those people back. So again, I'm all for going after waste, fraud, and abuse, but when you cut things that you don't even fully know what they do, people are going to get hurt. And so I'm afraid that they're not going to see the value of those earmarks. But I'm going to be one of the people standing up for it, because I know it's done incredible work here, not just for the time I've been in Congress, but certainly the work that Senator Leahy and Senator okay. He knows me, I'm going to want to stay here all day. Yes.
Thanks for being here. Actually, I was composing a letter to you and the rest of the delegation yesterday.
Okay, I get a preview.
You've illustrated how difficult it is, and I wanted to say, really appreciate the work that you do. And just to touch on a lot of points, the us versus them, I feel like them now.
Yeah.
And I think, as you said, you pointed out how it's changed. So the cooperative stuff, I think what has to happen first is the Democrats have to win the midterm elections.
I agree.
And that'll make the Republicans more likely to compromise. That means the onus is on us to actually become more active members of the Democratic Party, and not just in elections in Vermont, but other places in the United States.
Yeah.
And also, but for you guys, also as mentioned, and you said it, there's not sort of one or more Democratic leaders that are articulating the Democratic narrative.
And that needs to change.
And there may be a way to do it. Maybe you need a national convention, or maybe the national committee has to do something more serious in terms of getting it publicized and getting some attention. I don't think going to the streets is going to do too much, but we need to be angry and we need to be mobilized, and I think we need you guys to figure out how to develop that narrative and broadcast it to the American people, including you mentioned working class people who really felt marginalized, and anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I will just say, I actually think it does make a difference when we go into the streets just for that one point. Regardless of how you feel about the state of Israel, when Netanyahu tried to meddle with the judiciary, the nation took to the streets, and he had to walk it back. I know that it's not just, Trump is a man who cares about his legacy. He has people who work for him who care about his legacy. Do they want his legacy to be that he left office with his approval ratings in the toilet? Just person to person. There are going to be people desperately protecting his image. And I do think it does matter that we take to the streets. You asked me about something else. Yes, we absolutely need a clearer, more defined message and strong leaders. But you started with something else that I wanted to say one other thing about.
Off your elections, but.
Yeah, so look, right now, you do not have divided government.
No.
Right? You have, so the Democrats are not in power in the House, the Senate, or the White House. Okay, and Republicans have had more appointees to the Supreme Court as well. In order for us, I believe, to get back to some sense of regular order in government, we do need to flip the House. Because right now there is no check on the chaos. Until we can get 3 people to join us, there is no check on the chaos. It's going to continue. And so I'm very focused on 2026. I can't talk in my official capacity about campaigns, but I don't think you're wrong. Yes.
So one of the things that I am worried about is that I haven't seen in our mainstream media enough discussion about Curtis Jarvin, about Project 2025, about technocracy, these authoritarian visions that are explicitly, like unambiguously against democracy. And I think right now we have this opportunity. I'm hoping that maybe there are some signs that Republicans who do care about democracy, maybe do they understand like this vision that J.D. Vance is following of Curtis Jarvin, and this explicitly like fascist authoritarian vision. Mm-hmm. Do they understand it? If so, are they just afraid? And is there a moment where like our Republican-Democrat divide here, I think, is preventing us from working together to stand together against something that threatens all of us?
I really appreciate that. I was thinking about it this week. I actually think the divide right now is not Democrat-Republican, based on what I've seen in the last few weeks in earnest. It's between people who believe that we should have a democracy and people who are comfortable with having a unitary executive, to have somebody who is more powerful than the other 2 branches. That is what I see playing out. And I hear a lot from my Republican colleagues in committee about how, we're lucky that Elon Musk is willing to give up his time and his. No, I'm serious. They're not being facetious. They're willing to give up his time and his expertise and lend it in service to our country. Elon Musk has billions and billions of dollars in federal subsidies and government contracts. Right now, he has linked the Doge account to X. He is going to monetize that. He is trying to set up a rival company to take on PayPal. This is not out of the goodness of his heart. He is a businessman. It is about following the money. Well, there's that too. But I'm saying, if you admire him for being a billionaire, which many of my colleagues do, if you admire him for that, how do you think he got that? Yes, he had some handouts along the way, but he also has an eye to what is going to give him the advantage every time, not us. And, I went to the inauguration. I felt like it was really important to go. I was absolutely stunned and dismayed to see a row of billionaires sitting behind the president in front of the people who were going to be serving in his cabinet. We all know that, Trump thinks about stagecraft. That was a choice that he made, to put the billionaires right behind him and have the people who were going to be doing the work of government sitting in the back. That should concern all of us, regardless of who you voted for or what your party is. I don't think we want the extremely wealthy in this country to have more power than all of you. And I think we gotta end that, unfortunately.
We all have cards. If you have other, I know there's other questions.
Yeah,
Please reach out to us. Send in stuff to the website. We will answer everything.
And if you're having trouble getting Social Security benefits, if you're having trouble accessing a federal program, please, this is a lot of the work that we do in my office. So, check in with one of my folks before we get to the next stop. Thank you so much for your time.